This is Caffeinated Risk, the monthly podcast for security professionals by security professionals, focused on the principles of enterprise security risk management, exploring technology and business management issues and how they relate to information security risk. Once a month, two self-proclaimed grumpy security guys bring you analysis, insights, and interviews with leading security risk professionals to learn how they work through a project, a program, or their careers using a risk-based approach to security. Now here are your hosts, Tim McCreet and Doug Leese.
So, back from GSX.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, this was my year as president, so I had a chance to host a lot of the events within the Global Security Exchange. So that was last week. It was probably one of the best conferences I've been to in a while. And I'm not biased just because I was sitting there on the stage for a couple of those sessions. No, that wasn't it. But do you know what it was? It was this. It was a change, right? You could feel it. We actually started talking about risk on the opening session. We started talking about resilience and where organizations have to go and where the profession needs to go. And then on day two, which was the Tuesday morning on the 12th of September, I had the honor of sitting and interviewing President Bush, which was super cool. So George W. Bush was on the stage for an hour, and he talked about those things. He talked about resilience and coming back and the human spirit and where and the hope that he has for where we can go as a species. I thought that was pretty impressive to hear that from somebody who was a president of the U.S. in some pretty dark days. So yeah, it was pretty cool to sit on the stage with him and to talk about that.
Wow. Obviously, you had to have been there to take part in it. You did write an article, so...
I did, and it's coming out in the next week or so, Canadian Security Magazine. I wrote an article, Reflections on GSX, and I do it every year when I get back from GSX. But this year was a bit different, right? Just because I had a chance to sit and talk to the president. And it's Canadian Security Magazine. It's Risk Perspectives, and it'll be out, I think, in the first week of October. And we actually had it approved by President Bush's communications team. So they read the content and they were okay with it. Yeah. So it's a chance to talk, at least you can see a little bit more about what the session was like and what we uncovered during our chat with President Bush and how human he really is.
You'd mentioned there was one panel there, a decade of ESRM. And
yeah.
For anybody who's been listening to the podcast and doesn't know what ESRM is, that is Enterprise Security Risk Management. And the difference between that and cybersecurity risk management, if you were to do the elevator pitch, what's the difference is cyber's just one of the risks.
Absolutely.
If you're looking back a decade at ESRM, I think that kind of the first thing that would come to mind for me, and it's neat because it's like 10 years ago you guys proposed this, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And IEEE, they have an award called the Test of Time Award, and I came across a paper that was granted that. Every word I was reading, even though it was older, seemed just grounded in everything I was still seeing today. So that test of time made sense. If you throw the ESRM original text against that test of time lens, what would be different from what you folks thought 10 years ago?
Good question. I think that actually came up on part of this. So it was almost an entire day session for a workshop, and then I had a chance to sit on the panel for about an hour and a half. And some of the questions that were brought up during the workshop were, what's changed since the first, presentations were done, since the first books were written. The only thing, one of the major things that's changed is the speed now of change, right? That the adaptability that you're asking security professionals to follow is I think you have to be now more adaptable. You have to be more resilient. And I think that was one of the things that I don't think anyone could ever have looked down the road and went, we're going to have AI. We're going to have, the speed that we have today of some of the types of attacks and threats that become realized. I don't think we were thinking that completely through. Now I think what it's done is it's actually forced us to be more resilient, to look at things from a different lens and to try to be a bit more broad in our approach And one other thing that they talked about is driving home this idea of iterative approaches, which was really cool. Like I lost count of how many times I heard in sessions the concept of ideate, right? Where you're going to sit down and pull out a napkin or a whiteboard and everyone's going to have a chance to talk about stuff. And we struggled with that early on. I think that was one of the things on the panel, Brian Allen and Rochelle Lawyer were there. So the two authors of the 3 textbooks that we've been using forever were both on the panel. And Brian mentioned that is that he was so impressed to see this year at our Global Security Exchange that the concept of ideate has been around in different sessions. And they talked about how to run different workshops to draw ideas out of people. We didn't have that 10 years or so ago. We thought we did. We would have a couple of meetings, we'd write some notes, and we were good, right? We had a good approach. But now this whole idea of a formal design thinking process embedded in some of the project management techniques that we're using, that was really cool to see. That maturity, right, of where we're going.
Yeah. I think 10 years ago, it would be heresy to say we're not going to follow the waterfall SDLC model.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 18 months later, you've almost got Hello World to come up on the screen, But you've had lots of intense meetings about requirements gathering, and you've got sign-offs and then you get to the other end and it doesn't work.
Yep.
And then, the DevOps folks came along and said, just build a little piece, make it work like you want, and then just keep going.
Yeah.
That's one thing for software because the goal typically doesn't change that much. But I think for risk management, and definitely in cyber, it can change in an hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where that's not a thing anymore, or, wow, that is a new threat vector we hadn't considered last week.
Yep.
So now the requirement needs to be X. Yeah, well, we're 18 weeks down the road on this other initiative. Should we finish it? Or it's like, it doesn't matter. It's not fixable. We've got this new exposure. We need to deal with it. And I think it's challenging for an organization that has been built up over decades on, I gather requirements, I define a spec, I go build to that, and then there it is. And then it comes out the other end of the line and it either measures up or it doesn't. There's no concept of, well, halfway down the building process, we figured out we don't need it, or that's never going to work because of X.
Yep.
This is where an ongoing risk community in your organization, I think, has to be kind of head on a swivel, always looking out for what's next, right?
Agreed. And I think that was one of the topics that we had. And one of the things we spoke about on the panel was this concept of creating that risk committee or that security governance committee. And you're right, that's exactly what it is, Doug. It's always, always looking to see or at least assessing where you are today and what you have to change in your posture. And I think that was a big takeaway for a lot of the folks in the room, is that this idea of security by committee, everyone thought it would screw things up, or security by governance, a governance committee didn't make sense. It was too cumbersome. But no, it gave license to people to do that design thinking process. And just like you said, you're partway through a project and you realize, oh crap, this is so not going to work. And it's like, what the hell do I do with this now? Well, step back, right? So that whole concept of fail fast, you step back, you fix it, you're going to go fail again. But I think what it did is it gave people the license to actually look at it from a different perspective and to hear some of the successes that we had. I mean, so we had Mike Lashley from MasterCard, remember? And he talked about that, this idea that when they put the physical and cyber teams together and started doing risk assessments, they had some mistakes and they had some issues along the way. But what it created, it generated a better product. And I think that's what we're seeing now is the maturity over a decade. We're generating a better product. One of the things they talked about in the session was the concept of the threat assessments are getting more realistic. They're far more focused on what's really relevant to the organization. So it isn't this, and we're going to have an asteroid from outer space hit the planet. Yeah, and some of the stuff that we looked at and we included just because it was taught to us. Mm-hmm. Now they're challenging the stance that when you're doing the risk assessment, and if you're doing it holistically with physical and cyber folks on the same team, like what MasterCard put in place, you give yourself such a more broad idea, and you're able to narrow. You start from broad, but you actually narrow it down to something more practical and realistic because you're involving experts from both sides that are really focused on your organization. That was super cool to hear some of the successes that people had in that workshop.
I think because the landscape moves by the hour in some cases, but definitely by the month, and sometimes these project rollouts are measured in years.
Yeah.
If you were to consider an organization that decided to change their point of sale terminals, for example.
Yeah, okay, fair. Yeah, that's a monster, right?
And they're a national provider, that's a year. Mm-hmm. And that's multiple teams doing a year. Or if the bank decided that they're going to change out their ATMs because there's a flaw. It's complicated, not just because you have the logistics of getting to every single location, but because there's money involved, because there's the confidence that that's really the software that should be going in that device, because they're changing out the radio communications. These things have to be supervised. They have to be ratified. There's a lot of things that we take for granted, that when somebody lays out all these steps, they go, I'm amazed you could get it done in a year then.
Yeah.
If you find out halfway through that the thing you put in, it has an issue that was just revealed last week by some well-meaning researcher. But let's say it comes to light that there's a problem and you're halfway down. At this point, you probably should finish. And then you should start a remediation thing just on the heels with that. Yeah. But I think where we need to get to is that the risk professionals and the GRC need to stop pulling things off of, a 10-year-old book on the internet. And what's the real risk to the organization with proceeding with this project, knowing that there is a flaw?
Right.
Well, how actively is the flaw being exploited right now? Right now, there's only two people that can execute it.
Yeah.
The guy that found it and the guy that validated it. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And both of them are friendlies right now? Yeah, And what are you have to be standing in front of the bank machine. Well, we already got a camera for that, so it's not that much different than X and Y.
Yeah.
And so, no, carry on, because we're already into this rollout for $42 million or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But the risk professional at that point becomes that business enabler. Do we go ahead? Do we not? And they become the most valuable person in that decision. Here's the whole picture. You're shipping non-compliant stuff now based on what we understood last month. You were good. Things changed. Now you're non-compliant, but we're continuing on. And the risk exception is we need to finish this, and then you need to come on the heels of that to do X and Y.
Right.
And if we can figure out how to patch it in flight, the last half of the things going in will actually be good. But we've got these other controls in place.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a lot of that thought process in your average risk assessment. It's still pretty by the book. So how do we get them there? How do we get them to start thinking like a business person?
And I think that's the part now that I think what we saw with ESRM was a mindset change across the security profession, and people were excited to see something different. It was a chance to get to the table at a different level and to talk at things, at least from a more enterprise perspective. Then the idea of convergence, right, moving into ESRM, I thought that was great to watch over the years. So again, I go back to Dave Tyson when he wrote his book about converging physical and cyber. It wasn't to achieve the nirvana of ESRM-based approaches to security. It was first and foremost, it was a fiscal idea to save a little bit of money, but also gain greater productivity from the physical team to help out with the cyber. So that started a whole decade in the 90s to look at, can we bring the two teams together? And now, as we move into that enterprise level with ESRM from a security perspective, I think it's great. But you bring up two really good points. As one, can we get past the stale dated approach for threat risk assessments, because it's killing us, right? We're constantly looking for exceptions as opposed to enabling the business. So we haven't changed our language yet on the concept of doing the risk assessment. And the second is, how do we Your example was perfect. We have to roll something out. We're partway through it. We're not going to be able to we have to roll first something that's not up to par to get it to par. Mm-hmm. Let's understand what that means to the business. We're not having those discussions. We're not having those at a level where people accept it, or they either trust our judgment or they trust the final result of the risk assessment. So that's my fear, is that we've got to get us to this next level of maturity as professionals and start looking at things. So we need to start looking at different tools and what else can we bring in, and what other aspects from security can I bring into the conversation to show my business executives that we have taken into account all of these factors, and here's our recommendation. Mm-hmm. We need to get better at that. And that's one of the things we talked about in the panel, is that it's on us now to become those enablers, but we have to practice that skill set. And I think there's some groups that do a great job of it, but others, everyone needs to do a little bit of homework still.
Remember when we used to debate whether we should turn SSL on or not because we weren't sure the CPUs could handle the load? Yeah. That really wasn't that long ago. And in fact, some company who may have just bought a really large logging outfit used to sell cards that would offload that for your firewall.
Isn't that crazy? Like, how long? That wasn't even 10 years ago. That was like, I think 8 years ago or 7 years ago.
Yeah, it's probably 10 or 15, but when you look at the evolution of, business, that's like light switch speed, right? So,
yeah.
So wow. Things evolve all the time. When we look at an evolving landscape, I think the scarier thing now is the way organized crime has figured out how to hold businesses ransom.
Yeah.
Well, we've had MGM, I think Air Canada, Suncor, obviously.
Yeah.
And a half a dozen others, same gang, apparently.
Yep.
Well, again, how do you know? They don't leave a memo, so that was us. But
yeah,
it looks the same. Different industries. So the one thing all those industries have in common is they have money.
Yep.
So the criminals have figured out, hey, I can start to steal money from all these digitized companies. This is a real threat now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
5 years ago, ransomware was about locking down my documents.
Yep.
Now it's holding companies ransom for 30, 40 million. How do we deal with that? That's an emerging threat that isn't in any books.
No.
You should watch for ransomware is about the best guidance you get. It's like, and then what?
Yeah. And then what?
What's a recoverable amount? Like, how resilient do you have to be? How much damage would there need to be before you'd even consider having the conversation about paying for something?
Well, that's the frightening part, right? Is that you're right. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this wasn't on their radar. I mean, you and I were chasing toll fraud way back in the day, and that's going back a bit. And I mean, crime has always adapted. That's one of the things we talked about in one of the ESRM sessions. We had some technology and future forecasting sessions as well, like game-changing sessions. And they talked about ransomware and a few other changes to the landscape. One of the things that I was talking to someone at GSX, and you and I have had this discussion, is if the bad guys figure out that there's profit, they will migrate toward it. Mm-hmm. And once they start doing that, when you start seeing them leveraging an incredible amount of effort into it, you know that they've found a sweet spot. And this is where they want to play. So we will always, from this point forward, we're always going to be dealing with a criminal element for ransomware and for others, right? And so if I'm looking at this from a risk perspective, I should, if I'm running a good holistic enterprise-wide security program, I need to incorporate this concept of intelligence into my program, whether it's physical or cyber. But I need to understand, at least to know, how does the other side of the line look at my organization, and what's intriguing about us, and more importantly, why would somebody want to do something to us? Because I reminded somebody that ransomware is not like rain or a forest fire or a flood. It isn't a natural disaster. It's generated by a human, distributed by a human, targeting an organization full of humans. Mm-hmm. So there's intent.
There's intent, yeah.
There's purpose in there. There's meaning behind it, right? So we need to understand what that intent is. So years ago when they were doing crime theory with neighborhoods that were that had become into disarray, everything from the broken window theory up and through to what you're doing for crime prevention through environmental design. We saw that with risk management from the ESRM side of the house, where if I look at risk holistically, I'm going to take a look at all risks, whether it's cyber or physical, and then come up with what's my approach to remediate. Now we're into this next phase where we've got a very sophisticated adversary who is leveraging the business of crime against your business. And what can we do about it? And that's where we have to start looking at intelligence as one of the ways to start offsetting, or at least giving us a level playing field, understanding why we're being targeted. More importantly, what can we do to help protect ourselves?
Yeah.
I think, right, we got to get to that space.
Yeah, we keep talking convergence of cyber physical, but I'm thinking we got to add financial into there. Because the financial impact or the lack of a financial impact should probably be a much bigger part of a lot of these cyber and risk conversations. If the adversary hits an organization and it's, I don't know, $10 million is what they want for their ransom. I don't know, is that a good number or a bad number? But let's just easy math, right? How much effort is required to repair that damage, like based on your resilience? Let's assume that you're taking some measures to design backup strategies that are difficult to compromise, and you actually understand how your business works, and you can recover somewhat. But that's going to come at a cost. Okay, so if it's $10 million to repair it and they want $10 million as a ransom, I'm presuming at this point we don't pay the ransom and we spend the $10 million fixing it up.
Right.
I don't want to encourage this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was $100 million to fix it up, there's $10 million to get it back.
So those are those lovely executive discussions that get to happen, right? So we get to go in the room and provide the data and then understand what the impact is. And you're right, it's always going to be that interesting conversation. Is that, look, if they're, let's use the $10 million example. If it's going to cost me 10 to fix it and recover from it, and it's 10 to get it, the only caveat with paying is, are you sure they're not going to do it again? That you're going to get your data? That they haven't done anything with it? They haven't sold it? They haven't? Do you know what I mean? Like there's so many things that you have to start asking yourself if you are going to get on the path of, I'm going to pay the 10 to save the 100. Okay, I appreciate that, but those same questions come up: is, are you sure you're getting your data?
Well, but isn't that part of your intelligence?
It should be, right?
Just because you got your stuff back doesn't mean you're out of the woods.
Correct. Yeah. And that now you're on somebody else's list, right? And now you get to be targeted for something else. And what else did they leave behind when they took away all of your data, right?
Mm-hmm. And what did they learn from that data about you and your business partners?
Correct. Yeah.
Therefore, any business partner that you have right now could be on the list for next. And then what are they going to learn back about you 6 months from now?
Absolutely. Yep. And come back and try it again. So, yeah.
This sounds a lot like the kind of espionage stuff and counter-espionage you would see in spy movies from 20, 30 years ago.
Yep.
But this is very real now.
It is very real. I mean, that's, some of the stuff where I'm working right now, that's some of the stuff that we're seeing, is that this is a very, very real thing. And the world has changed. We talked about that concept of resilience. So one of the things that was brought up, and we continue to bring up from an ESRM perspective, resilience means more than just pulling out the book and having a plan. Like, have you tested it? Have you walked through it? All of the points you just brought up, Doug. Like, do you actually know what your supply chain looks like? And how do you trust the supply chain, or how do you understand what the impact is of a supply chain breach against your organization? It may be an indirect impact, but what is that? And are you aware of it? Are you aware of the financial implications of a third-party supplier being impacted? What's their threat exposure to you? What do they have from an accessibility into your environment? What do you have to worry about now? If you get your widgets from company A, does that mean I got to go to company B now? Because A was compromised, and they now have proprietary information about my organization. What's the risk that I'm facing? Do I have to look at and shop for another supplier? Those are all things now we have to have those conversations. We never had those before, but that's part of the discussion for resilience now.
And if the genie's out of the bottle, it doesn't matter that I go to business B because they still have all my info because they stole it from widget maker A.
Company A. Exactly. Yep.
So now what detections or what should I be looking for? Because based on what they learned from that, I can expect attacks in this area of the following nature, of the following threat actors, et cetera. Piecing all of that together at a global scale it's almost impossible for a small company to do.
Yeah, most can't, right? They can't.
But there are companies that provide threat intelligence, but there's differences, right?
Yeah, and this is where so our approach is more human-based. So you can get, indicators of compromise and lists of IP addresses and attacks that out there that have been validated with a CVE, and that's terrific, right? Because that can be fed into your SIM tool. You can use that and apply it, but most of that stuff happens after the fact, right? So that's already known information. I think where the value of programs, similar to what we have, is that I want to get ahead of it, right? It's the left of boom conversation. It's the push left conversation that we always have from DevSecOps is how do I become more proactive in my approach? How do I look for things in advance? And that's the value of a really good Intel program is I want to understand am I being talked about? Am I being targeted? How would I know? And what can I do to protect myself? Like those are the questions you should be asking if that's the approach that you're going to take. And I think intelligence is quickly becoming a requirement for most large organizations because it's one of the few ways that you can stay ahead of it. It goes back to the whole concept of ESRM. What's the business goals and objectives and what are the assets that support it? Every Intel program, if it's a good one, needs to understand just that. What's the business, like the entire business, where it operates, the people in it, the board of directors, all of that, working your way through. And then what are the assets that you need every day for that business to be successful? And what if somebody targets one of those assets, right? And what does that look like? And how close can I get to when they first start talking about it? What does the time look like? Because one of the things I wrote about this on LinkedIn, and this concept of time, is our whole job, like your job and my job and the work that we do is to give our companies time.
Yep.
Like I want to give you time to make a decision. I want to give you a heads up. And it's that my favorite line whenever I work with a new team is that I only ask for 5 minutes. It's the 5-minute rule. If something bad's going to happen, if you come to my office and say, Tim, something really bad's going to happen, and here's the 5-minute rule. I'm like, awesome. I will take that 5 minutes and work with it. What if you could give a company the equivalent of that 5 minutes? And maybe it's 5 days, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month. What would you do with that time to protect yourself against a potential attack? Lots.
Right.
Lots. So that's where I think the value of having that type of program in place, incorporated as part of your ESRM-based approach, is that that's a risk you can assess. That's a risk you can work on. And you can incorporate that into your remediation strategies. Bringing in a strong Intel program is one of the things that I think most big organizations have to start considering as they move forward.
Well, I think that's a lot of great advice for early in the day.
I was going to say this is early this morning. This is early. So, yeah.
It definitely looks like ESRM's going to be with us for a while. So that's great to hear.
Fingers crossed, as caffeinated risk moves into its second decade, when we talk about this after 20 years, that's the goal, right? What does it look like after 20 years? So.
Wow. Yeah. Let's get through the first one first.
Yeah, I'm going to say, let's get through the first decade. So there we go.
Awesome. Thanks.
You betcha. Thanks for listening to the latest podcast from Caffeinated Risk. Make sure you visit our website, caffeinatedrisk.com, to stay up to date on what we've been working on. Our website has bios of our podcast guests, posts about topics we're passionate about, and even a library of reference material we find valuable in the work we do every day. And don't forget to subscribe to Caffeinated Risk on your favorite podcast service. This way, you'll be notified when we release our next podcast, and you can listen to our previous guests just in case you missed them. Thanks so much for listening to Caffeinated Risk.